The term martial arts is today mostly associated with its Asian variants, for example karate, taekwondo, or with regard to sword fighting, kendo comes into mind. Only a few people are aware of the rich European tradition of martial arts. The so-called Gudrunlied, which is dated around 1230, mentions 4 Schirmschläge or fencing strikes. Other sources, like for example the Nibelungenlied, indicate that there were masters that systematically taught the art of fighting. The oldest instructional manual of a European fighting art dates to the end of the 13th or the beginning of the 14th century. It demonstrates the use of sword and buckler. Remarkably, throughout the book, clerics are shown fencing, so we can clearly see that fighting monks were not a privilege of the Shaolin monasteries in China. The following period in time, up until the 16th century, produced over 50 German manuscripts dealing with fencing. In later times, the invention of printing dramatically increased the number of available fencing manuals. The term fencing, or in German Fechten, at this time included the whole repertoire of armed and unarmed combat. If you compare the German term Fechten with the English term fighting, you can clearly see the word relationship between the two. In the period of time covered in this work, not only the use of the sword was taught, there was also instruction in the use of spears and halberds, daggers, and also in the art of wrestling. A German accounts book from 1474 is the first evidence of a regulated organization of fencing masters. The Brotherhood of Our Beloved Woman, the Pure Virgin Mary, and the Holy and Powerful Duke of Heaven, Saint Mark, or short, Marksbrüder, was organized like the craftsmen's guilds. Most members of the Marksbrüder were craftsmen. The society was even granted its own coat of arms. In the year 1487, Emperor Friedrich III granted a letter of privilege to the Marksbrüder. He allowed only members of their society to offer paid instruction in fencing. The seat of Brotherhood was located in Frankfurt, where once a year the examination for the degree of master was conducted. The Marksbrüder had an extraordinary monopoly, which many of today's martial arts organizations would be very glad to have. In the year 1570, an important competitor organization named Society of the Feather at Greifenfels introduced its coat of arms. In 1607, Emperor Rudolf II granted them their own letter of privilege. In old documents, they were often called Federfechter. The most important weapon detailed in the surviving German fencing manuals is definitely the hand and a half or the longsword. In the year 1389, we can find the first written evidence of a fencing master who shaped the way of fighting with this weapon for a very long time. His name was Johannes Lichtenauer. He formulated a pragmatic martial art around the use of the longsword. His method included fighting in armor, as well as on foot, as on horseback. Lichtenauer concealed his art by writing in verse. This was a common method of preserving information in a time when only a few people could read and write. There is no surviving manual written by the master himself. Luckily, many of his followers wrote down his verses together with short explanations to them, the so-called Glosse. Even Master Talhofer, who is nowadays very famous in reenactment circles, founded his art on the basis of Lichtenauer's method. Very little is known about the life of Lichtenauer. His name would indicate a relationship to a place called Lichtenau. Unfortunately, there were many places with this or a similar name in the times. One probable theory points to a place called Lichtenau in the area of today's Poland. The so-called Döbringer manuscript indicates that Lichtenauer was a traveling fencing master who learned his art from many masters in different countries before systemizing it for himself and his students. The longsword consists of the hilt and the blade. The hilt consists of the pommel, the grip, and the crossguard or simply cross. blade is divided into the long edge, the short edge, and the point. One can subdivide the blade into weak and strong. The strong is the first half of the blade from the cross to the middle. The remaining half from the middle to the point is called weak. This simple test is better than a myriad of words to explain the meaning of weak and strong. Let your partner hold a sword in front of him. Tell him to grip it as tight as he's able to. If you now try to push the sword at the strong part of the blade, it will not be easy to do. However, if you push on the weak part, you only need a small amount of force to move it away. To reconstruct the longsword techniques on this DVD, we use mainly 5 fencing manuals which all explain the teachings of Lichtenau. Even though the authorship isn't always clear, 4 of these books are attributed to the masters Peter van Danzig, Hans van Speyer, Jud Lew, and Sigmund Ringeck. The remaining anonymous manual is generally known under the title Goliath. As secondary sources, we use the fencing manual of Joachim Meyer and the house book, which is generally attributed to the priest Hanko Döbringer. Just a last word regarding this work. Every reconstruction of a historical fighting art can only represent the present state of research. Even though we can be sure about the principles of the art thanks to the many sources, it's possible that new sources we may find in the future will offer different points of view on certain aspects. The distance between 2 fences can, for teaching reasons, be divided up in different ways. The following division has worked quite well for us. Standing in wide distance means you have to take an adjustment step to be able to attack with a simple step. Being in middle distance means you can attack the opponent with a simple step. At near or close distance, you can attack your opponent without taking a step. At close distance, you're close enough to use grips and wrestling techniques. The expression blade in line means that the weapon is aligned with the target in a straight line and thus threatens an opening. By closing the line, one removes the threat of the opposing weapon from the opening. Vor and nach designate the concept of Lichtenauer to always seize the initiative or to regain it if necessary. To be in the state of vor, or before in English, means to force your opponent to react and to defend himself instead of attacking you. Thus it's better to attack directly or spoil the preparation of the opposing attack than wait for the opponent's actions. If you're in the state of nach, or after, through an early action of your opponent, you can regain the initiative through an action that happens in this, or at the same time. The term Indis is also closely related to fühlen or feeling. The concept of feeling is also very important in Master Lichtenauer's art. As soon as a bind happens during a fight, one should try to judge the opponent's intentions through the pressure he's putting on your blade. Thus you can determine the appropriate techniques even without having to look, by simply relying on perception. As it is still practiced in modern fencing, Master Lichtenauer divided the man into 4 openings. Contrary to the modern concept of openings, where the openings move with the weapon, the older openings were divided by a horizontal and a vertical line crossing nearly at solar plexus height. Since the techniques shown in this video contain many techniques directed towards the face, it's essential to wear a fencing mask during practice. Padded gloves, like those used in street hockey or ice hockey, are essential for many exercises. As practice weapons for beginners, we recommend swords made from wood, preferably hickory or beech. Recently, hardened aluminium as a material for training swords has become more and more acceptable. Steel swords are not immediately necessary at the beginning. Of course, one shouldn't take part in exercises with sharp swords. If you decide on a blunt steel sword, you should pay close attention to the data for the ranges of application the manufacturer intended. However, it's important that the sword selected is not too heavy in order to correspond, at least to some extent, to the balance and feel of originals. The weight of an average 1.5-handed sword should be approximately 1.5 kilograms or 2.75 pounds. For free fencing, modified shinais from kendo are also used when equipped with a cross. Here you can see some practice weapons for the diverse branches of our art. First, the long sword as a basis for all kinds of weapons. Then the staff, the one-handed sword, mostly used together with a small shield or buckler, the long knife and the dagger.